Have you ever noticed that real life is never fully tragic, and never fully comic? Even in the darkest moments, there is hope. Even in happiness, there is tension. That in-between emotional space is called tragicomedy. And today, we are going to understand tragicomedy in such a clear way that you'll never forget it, whether for UGC NET, SET, or other exams. What is tragicomedy? Tragicomedy is a dramatic form where the situation is serious, sometimes even life-threatening, but the ending is not tragic. Characters may face death, exile, separation, loss of identity, but finally, catastrophe is avoided. Think of a student who is about to fail an exam, results come, and somehow they pass. That emotional journey, fear to relief, is tragicomic. Tragic threat plus comic resolution equals tragicomedy. Exam reminder. Always remember, tragicomedy creates high emotional tension without tragic destruction. Etymology of tragicomedy. Now let us understand the word itself. Tragedy comes from tragos meaning goat song. Comedy comes from komos meaning revel song. Tragicomedy means a combined dramatic label. The term itself suggests a hybrid genre, which already tells us why classical critics were uncomfortable with it. Origin. The word tragicomedy first appears in Roman drama, not Greek drama. Name to remember: Plautus. Play: Amphitryon. Plautus openly says, "I will make it a tragicomedy." Why? Gods and kings are tragic elements. Slaves and humor are comic elements. But here is the most important point. Aristotle never mentions tragicomedy in Poetics. Tragicomedy is not Aristotelian. Aristotle versus tragicomedy. Aristotle believed in purity of genre. Tragedy is noble characters plus serious action plus catastrophe. Comedy is low characters plus laughter plus happy ending. He kept tragedy and comedy strictly separate. Tragicomedy violates Aristotelian purity of genres. If Aristotle were alive today, would he approve tragicomedy? Answer will be number. Renaissance revival. Guarini. Now comes the Renaissance, the age of freedom. Reasons. Writers rejected rigid classical rules. Audiences wanted emotional variety. Life was seen as mixed, not black and white. Key figure: Giovanni Battista Guarini. Work: Il Pastor Fido, written in 1590. Guarini says tragicomedy takes dignity from tragedy and pleasure from comedy, avoiding death and misery. Theory of tragicomedy equals Guarini. Exam line. Guarini provides the philosophical defense of tragicomedy. Historical context: why tragicomedy emerged. Why did tragicomedy become popular? Because society was changing. Human emotions were seen as complex. Audiences wanted hope, not despair. Golden insight. Tragicomedy occupies a middle emotional space, neither despair nor pure laughter. Tragicomedy in English drama. English drama welcomed tragicomedy. Why? Less strict rules, more practical theatre, mixed audience tastes. Shakespeare becomes the master. Shakespeare's tragicomedies. Shakespeare never used the word tragicomedy, but he perfected it. Late plays, romances, The Winter's Tale, Cymbeline, The Tempest, Pericles. Common pattern: grave mistakes, apparent deaths, long suffering, miraculous reconciliation. Exam-ready line. Shakespeare replaces tragic inevitability with moral regeneration. Core features of tragicomedy: Keycap 1, serious action without catastrophe. Keycap 2, mixed characters, kings and clowns. Keycap 3, emotional oscillation, fear to hope. Keycap 4, romantic elements, love, separation, recognition. Keycap 5, providence or chance. Keycap 6, suspended tragic closure. Tragicomedy versus tragedy versus comedy. Tragedy is inevitable destruction. Comedy is laughter and social harmony. Tragicomedy is danger plus survival plus reconciliation. Tragicomedy is emotionally complex. Tragicomedy in Ben Jonson. Now comes a tricky exam area. Jonson believed in classical purity. He criticized tragicomedy. Exam trap. Jonson opposed tragicomedy but could not escape hybridity. Tragicomedy in John Fletcher. John Fletcher systematized English tragicomedy. His definition: a tragicomedy is not so called because it wants deaths, but because it wants the true tragedy's ending. Fletcher's rules: no deaths, serious plot, high stakes, major works, philaster, a king and no king. Johnson vs. Fletcher. Ben Jonson supported classical purity, criticized tragicomedy. Exam trap. He criticized it but still used mixed tones. John Fletcher systematized tragicomedy. Fletcher's definition: a tragicomedy wants deaths, but wants the true tragic ending. Works: philaster, a king and no king. French classical resistance. In France, tragicomedy faced resistance. Neoclassical critics followed Aristotle strictly. Preferred purity of genre. Tragicomedy seen as impure. Now comes a very high-level concept. Tragedy purges fear and pity. Tragicomedy reassures and consoles. Outstanding exam line. Tragicomedy replaces catharsis with consolation. Tragicomedy in modern drama. In modern drama, tragicomedy becomes darker. Life is uncertain. Meaning is unstable. Example: Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Comedy exists, but despair remains. In modern drama, tragicomedy becomes darker. Example: Waiting for Godot. Comedy exists but meaning is uncertain. Lesser-known exam points. Pastoral connection. Rural setting softens tragedy. Moral function. Teaches forgiveness and endurance. Psychological shift. From fate to human error and correction. These points are gold for UGC NET. Tragicomedy and Aristotle's catharsis. Very important theoretical slide. Tragedy purges fear and pity. Tragicomedy reassures and consoles. Brilliant exam line. Tragicomedy replaces catharsis with consolation. Major practitioners: Plautus, Guarini, Shakespeare, Fletcher, Beckett. Key texts: Amphitryon, Plautus, Il Pastor Fido, Guarini. The Tempest, Shakespeare. Philaster, Fletcher. Waiting for Godot, Beckett. Memory line: Plautus named it, Guarini framed it, Shakespeare perfected it, Fletcher defined it, Beckett darkened it. High probability MCQ facts. Before we finish, remember these for exams. Tragicomedy is non-Aristotelian. Guarini gave its theory. Fletcher gave its definition. Shakespeare perfected it. It avoids death but keeps tension. If you understand tragicomedy, you understand how literature mirrors real human life. Serious, painful, yet hopeful. So, when we step back and look at tragicomedy as a whole, we understand one important thing: tragicomedy is not confusion, it is balance. It stands between tragedy and comedy, not because it is weak, but because it is closer to real human life. Life does not always end in death like tragedy, and life is not always laughter like comedy. Tragicomedy shows us suffering without destruction, fear without fatality, and error followed by correction.